Today's episode with Bryan Koch here on Sports Spectrum is presented by Compassion International and the Fill the Stadium initiative. The pandemic now more than a year old, 70,000 kids left without a sponsorship because of the pandemic, and we are standing in the gap with Compassion and our pro athlete friends to help release these kids and their family from poverty, and we're almost there. More than 50,000 seats have been filled with Compassion over the past year, and God is doing some incredible things, but we're not done yet, and we need your help. So if you have any opportunity to donate, we would love to have you participate with Fill the Stadium and Compassion to help these kids in desperate need of help. Check out fillthestadium.com to learn more and donate today with Compassion at fillthestadium.com.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. I am Jason. This is Sports Spectrum. And man, do we have one powerful story for you to hear today from Bryan Koch. He's a former pro baseball player and just recently finished pastoring for 33 years at GT Church in Reading, Pennsylvania. But the story doesn't just end there with Bryan. It goes even further because back in June of 2015, Bryan's wife of 28 years was killed by a drunk driver in the same accident that Bryan was involved in as well. Bryan went into a coma, had 19 surgeries, 36 blood transfusions, and lost his left leg. And this guy is still pressing on after the death of his wife, after the death of his baseball career, and we'll talk about that story in a second too, but still being able to persevere and find purpose in the pain. I was amazed talking to Bryan, listening to him, listening to his humility, listening to his faith, listening to how powerful his faith is and trusting in God, even amidst the worst circumstances that you can imagine as a husband losing your wife in a tragic accident. Bryan is now a speaker. He's a leadership coach. Like I said, he was a pastor for 33 years, and he continues to speak out and tell his story of who God is and why he is to be trusted even when you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This is one powerful story. Bryan's book is also called I'm All Right, A Journey of Tragedy to Triumph. I'm All Right, A Journey of Tragedy to Triumph. Take a listen to our conversation with Bryan Koch here today on Sports Spectrum. Bryan, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Jason. Glad to join your ministry today for sure.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. Great to connect. And you got a powerful story, my friend, some highs and certainly some lows as well that you've kind of had to walk through and navigate through, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. But Let's start a little bit and go back because there was some trials and some difficulties even from a worldly perspective in your baseball career as well.
Right.
Let's start with the baseball journey because you were selected in 1982 in the 26th round out of high school. So I have to imagine baseball was a big part of your life at a younger age of Bryan Koch.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would say we knew about God, raised in America, whatever, but baseball was my God.
Yes.
My dad as well. Baseball was the focus of our life, and so that's pretty much how we didn't go on family vacation until baseball season was over, and that kind of dictated. So it was a really big deal. And then leading up to high school, we had some good high school baseball teams. We're usually in the state finals, and you know how it works. You get scouts looking at you, talking to you. And my senior year, that's what happened. I was Cardinals, Blue Jays, White Sox weren't even on the picture. But eventually I graduated on a Thursday night, 1982. Friday was the second day of the MLB Draft. And about 11 o'clock that night, I got a call. By Monday, I signed my contract on Saturday. And by Monday, I was in spring training in Sarasota, Florida. So,
wow,
really cool story.
So you knew you were going pro out of high school. There's always that push-pull. I've talked to a lot of players and know them where college kind of comes into the picture if they're not drafted in a certain round or whatever. But you went right from high school to pros.
I was set. I was set to go to Mesa Community College in Arizona for 2 years, and then hopefully go on to Arizona State. I had an uncle that played there, almost like my brother, 7 brothers to my dad. But yeah, so I was headed toward Arizona, but then when I got drafted, I really wasn't much of a student in high school. Again, baseball was what my major was. I used to tell my parents, hey, I got an A in gym. That's my major. So I really didn't want to study. So when I got drafted by the White Sox, I was kind of encouraged, oh, well, maybe go to college. Maybe you'll get drafted higher. But I just took the draft and I signed with them. And yeah, that's how it ended up.
Interesting. Bryan Koch is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. So your faith journey, you said growing up, kind of know about God, but not really focused on, following Christ or knowing him as Lord. That wasn't a part of your journey?
No. I went to church once in a while, mainline denomination. I was what I would call a creaster, Christmas and Easter, maybe. So that's about what we did. But I did not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I really didn't know that was possible. And in high school, a real shout out to students. There was a young girl that I didn't go through the library much, but that day I walked through the library and I saw her there and she was cute. And I thought, maybe I should study. But she was a strong believer and she shared her faith with me that day quietly in the library. And long story short, her parents were both Christians and didn't believe in missionary dating. And they said, Bryan, because they knew me, they were teachers at Muhlenberg where I went to high school. They said, the only place you can go with our daughter is to church. And I thought, well, you know what? Your daughter's cute. I'll go to church. And that's where I first heard the preaching of the gospel. We're sitting there in the Church of the Nazarene. And I, in our part of the country, the Northeast, I thought, boy, it's either, Catholic or Protestant, but Church of the Nazarene, I kept thinking, wow, what is that? Yeah. But that's where I found Jesus Christ that night, about 10:30 at night on a Tuesday night. They were having special services and it changed my life forever.
Wow. And it was because of a girl, right?
Because of her. Yeah, that's right. Because of her being willing to share her faith. And then I went to church with her and then for the first time heard the gospel presented in a very powerful way. Holy Spirit obviously touched my life and I surrendered my life to him. I was a junior in high school at that time. So I was following God for about a year. It's interesting. I love your ministry. I love Sports Spectrum because it's about stories. And what I've said over the years in ministry is that every number, think of sports, every number has a name, but every name has a story and every story matters to God. So all of us have a story. And a big part of my story was receiving Christ as a junior in high school. And then that really changed my life because I wasn't a good student. I was drinking and doing some things I shouldn't have been doing with my life, staying just, good enough to play baseball. Because again, that was my focus. Yeah.
So where are you as far as faith and baseball when you get drafted? Because you're 18 years old at that point. And
just turned 18.
Yeah. So you're 18 and, I look at myself at 18 and I think, man, what a knucklehead I was. Wow. And I went to college and, had a freshman year that was quite eye-opening for me, just kind of being on my own for the first time and figuring out life. But you are then transferred to go and be a professional at 18 years old and try to be a pro baseball player and still grow in your faith. So what was all that like kind of at that time, trying to figure out life, trying to grow as a baseball player and try to figure out this whole Jesus thing?
Yeah, it was a great question. So I get drafted. I'm in spring training on Monday. And that previous year, I had been trying to grow. And what they told me when I came to Christ was, Bryan, you got to do 3 things. You've got to read your Bible, you got to pray, and you got to go to church. So I was going to church like 3 times a week, Sunday night, Wednesday. My dad actually thought it was going to mess my career up. He was, we going to church again? What in the world are you doing? Because my dad was not a follower at that time. Yeah. So I started reading my Bible. I come home that night, open the big family Bible, I turned to Zechariah. It would have been nice if someone had said, hey, start in the Gospel of John, maybe Matthew. I start in Zechariah with scrolls and visions. And I thought, this guy's got more problems than I got. And so it was a slower journey at first, but I was hungry for God and I kept reading. So really, when I got to spring training, that was another big thing because I'll never forget, I'm down there with pitchers and catchers. And I got roomed with an atheist, a Mormon, and a born-again Christian. And I thought, wow, this is going to be – and so I'm younger, so I'm being kind of quiet and holding steady. I'm not trying to – 18 years old. But it was really cool to have those conversations. I'll never forget it at the Waffle House and the hotel, just talking about God. Oh, does he exist? And that was a big part of my journey. And really, I've since then written a couple books, and one of them is called Follow. And I think discipleship is a really big deal. And I had a lot of opportunities one-on-one where guys would talk to me about what it means to pray. What does it mean to share your faith? And how come you're doing that? Doesn't seem right. And so I really got discipled big time in the minor leagues. We went to baseball chapel on Sundays when we had it. So it was a good growing time for me, even as a young player.
When we look at your career, it was just for a couple of years. It ended almost as quickly as you were drafted. Suddenly, baseball was over. So walk us through your minor league journey and kind of take us to what transpired to have your career end so quickly.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I signed the 26th round. The number one pick for the White Sox that year was Ron Karkovice,
sure,
who was the guy that they were obviously pushing to the majors. And so I, a lot of bullpen. I still was chewing tobacco at that time. So a lot of chewing tobacco in the bullpen, whatever. And so the first year didn't play a whole lot. John Bowles was our manager. So the second year, Karkovice got moved up. I started playing more in the Gulf Coast Rookie Ball League. And it was going well. I was young. I enjoyed it. I was passionate, loved the game. And then third year, that spring, came back the third year, Carlton Fisk got hurt. I'll never forget it. I'm in the locker room in Sarasota at Payne Park, and we were in a different facility because the big team was still there. And I'm reading the book of Jude for the first time. I'm just reading my Bible, a small book I have time before I get out there. And I'll never forget it. Brian Bowles runs up to me and says, "Hey, Brian, get your stuff together. You're going up to the show today." I thought he was messing with me. I thought, "Get out of here." I said, "Are you?" He goes, "No, I'm dead serious. Get your stuff ready." Fisk had gotten somewhere hurt or whatever. Mark Hill was going to catch, and I was just going to go up and work in the bullpen, whatever. And I was like blown away, freaking out, walking down the aisle of the bus, seeing Tom Seaver, Ron Kittle, all these guys. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I have their baseball cards." So that was a big deal. And I think they did that for minor leaguers to kind of motivate you, man. I worked harder that off season, lifting, trying to get bigger, whatever. So that was a great highlight. Came back the next year, went to the York Penn League, Niagara Falls White Sox, playing that season, got a lot of playing time. It was good. I was really enjoying getting to play a lot. We played the Geneva Cubs at home, Sal Magley Stadium, Niagara Falls, high school field. And that night changed my life. In fact, my story, Jason, I talk about, obviously losing my left leg, losing my left eye, losing the wedding ring off my left finger. I don't have much left on the left. So the book that I titled was called I'm All Right.
Yeah.
Because I really don't have a lot left on the left, but I really was all right because God was with me. But that night we're playing the Cubs. And I'm catching, and I'm looking at the dugout, getting some signals. This kid had hit a home run like the second inning, and I get the wiggling of the thumb. And the wiggling of the thumb meant, Brian, you need to give the same, thing to the pitcher, and we're going to intentionally go after him. Well, I had a decision to make in a short amount of time. I thought, I'm not going to do that. It's like, he hit a home run. All right, I'm not going to go beanball. So I just gave fastball inside, like way inside. He came flying out to the mound. You know how they put the gloves over their mouth? Well, no TV, but should have had a glove in his mouth because he was letting me have it because I didn't listen. Mm-hmm. And so the next pitch we did hit the kid, hit him on the glove hand. Well, I came up 2 innings later and they kind of retaliated and the ball was thrown behind my head. I turned back and hit me directly in my left eye. And that was the end of my career. I never was unconscious. I remember hearing the crowd kind of yell. It was Campbell Soup night. So if you brought a Campbell Soup thing, you got in a little cheaper. I remember laying there, and then that changed a lot of my whole life because I think the next couple of days they flew me to Chicago, met the team doctor, and my retina, my macula on my retina was totally damaged, and I only have about 10% vision out of my left eye. So that ended my career, and that was the end of it.
So you say you were laying there and it changed your life, right? Obviously, your career being over is a big life changer, but there's more that takes place because you, as we alluded to at the beginning, pastored for 33 years. To go into pastoring, and I think you're only in your mid 50s. So if I'm doing the math, you're pastoring in your early 20s pretty quickly. 26 pretty quickly after a baseball career when at 26 you probably should have been playing, maybe someday playing in Comiskey Park or whatever, and
Yeah, right.
you're pastoring. So take us through the next couple years, because that's got to be quite the shock when you're 20 years old and you find out, sorry, kid, no more baseball for you.
Yeah, it's a great transition. I often talk about it. The bat, the Louisville Slugger, was a big part of my life. And so when I say laying there, they got me to Chicago. I'll never forget being in this like hotel up on the top floor. I was going to go see the doctor. And I'm laying there and I'm saying, God, like, how could this be? Because I knew my eye was swollen way out. I knew I had serious problems. And I more than likely thought, this is it. Went to see the doctor. He said, yeah, Bryan, there's really not a lot I can do for that. You're probably not going to have good vision there. It's tough enough to hit a baseball with two eyes. Trying to do it with one isn't going to work. And so, yeah, my career there did end. And now I thought the struggle was like, this was my whole life. I mean, baseball was my whole life. Yeah. And now I'm going to have to get a real job. And now I'm going to have to maybe go back to college. And I really wasn't a good student. And so I ended up going to Mount Vernon Nazarene College out in Ohio, took kind of a coaching role with them, pitching, catching coach, and still a young guy, but enjoyed it. And it was great. In fact, Tim Belcher was the number one pick by the Yankees that year. And I remember catching him and talking a little bit. He goes, well, how's it going to be? I said, well, you're the number one pick in the nation, man. I said, it's going to be a little different than being the 26th pick. I said, so had a good time there. And it was there in that school. We were having a chapel, and a guy came and spoke, Tony Campolo, back in the day. And he said, I want everyone in the room to close their eyes and say, what would you do with your life if you didn't have to worry about money? Because it's amazing how much money drives our life. And it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. Money's not bad. It's the love of it. And I thought, well, I would do something for God. I was passionate about God. I was a part of baseball chapel. I was growing in my faith. But I thought, I didn't grow up in church. I don't know the first thing. I thought, what do pastors do all day? They talk for 30 minutes. I said, it's not a bad gig, to do that. But so I really struggled, and I thought, well, I would do something for Jesus. And he said, open your eyes. And he said, why are you going to let money change what you just said? And that was the first time I felt this tug at my heart, like God saying, Bryan, if you'll let me, I'll use you.
Wow.
That night I was in the dorm room just struggling. I was thinking, man, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what the call of God was. I never heard about that. And long story short, I ended up calling my mom, who I had led to faith. I led her to Christ. My dad still was not a believer. Well, he had just become a believer, so he was brand new. And I'm thinking, he's not going to understand this. But lo and behold, I ended up going to Bible college. I felt this tug at my heart, and it was the call of God. I really didn't even know what it was. I was dating a girl out there. She was a Christian. And I thought, man, this is going to end this, because now I'm going to have to go to Bible school to learn to be a minister. I was in my junior year, so I had a business degree, and ended up going to Bible college. And the rest became history.
Amazing story. It's funny how God kind of gives us these moments in our life where we can, go left or right. I tell people all the time, if I went left versus right when I was 21 years old to this area versus this, who knows what would have happened? Right. And then I come back to Proverbs, and I always see in my favorite verse in Proverbs 3 and 5 and 6, he says, in all your ways acknowledge you, and I will direct your path. I will direct your steps. And I think about, even in those moments when I wasn't acknowledging him, he was directing my steps in such an interesting way. Right. And I look at your journey, Bryan, it's clear he was doing that even before you had this intimate relationship with the Lord, or this deep rooted. I mean, when baseball was your God still, he was still directing your steps, right?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, it's funny you mention that, because like Psalm 37, verse 23 says, the Lord directs the steps of the godly. And then it's interesting, because it goes on and it says this, he delights in every detail of their life. So he directs our steps and he delights in every detail. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, there's a lot of details in our life, like getting hit in the face with a beanball isn't like, why should I delight in that? But God takes the good, the bad, the ugly, and he works it for his glory. Only God can take those horrible things we go through, or the good things, and turn them for his glory. I mean, that's really what God does. And that's what I saw happening. And the last thing on planet Earth that I ever thought Bryan Koch would ever do with his life is be in the ministry. I mean, that's the last thing. Not like if you did a career thing, a million things, but not that. And so God was really directing my life.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. And I think even from the injury, Bryan, that you talked about, you said you only had 10% vision. Is that still the case today?
Yeah, I have, and most of it's peripheral. So dead center in my left eye, I have nothing. I have some peripheral vision, but very, very little. Yeah. Now I've gotten used to it. I may get this sideburn a little shorter than the other one. That's the only thing that messes up, because now I'm so used to one eye that I don't think about it.
Wow. So it's interesting. Did you ever think about like wearing, I hate to say this, but like wearing a patch or something so that, you know, if you were just walking out, people would know? I mean, even just taking a chance on being a coach, you're putting yourself back into the field of play where a ball could get batted and hit you again, right? So was there any moments where you were wearing protective, protection?
Well, there were times, like I have 3 boys. My wife and I, raised 3 boys, and I wouldn't think about it. Like I in college, when I was coaching, I'd put the mask on, get behind there and catch with one eye. I caught Tim Belcher with one eye, because you do adjust depth perception. One time playing a driveway basketball game with my boys, they were big kids, and I tried to be like Shaq. I wasn't that good of a basketball player, but but I got an elbow from one of my sons right below my right eye, and it was like, whoa. Because you've only got one left. And so I started wearing some goggles and being a little smarter about that. But it was really interesting. And so I have thought about that. And you do, when you have lost one eye, you've only got one to go. And then, of course, I would have more loss in my life after my wife and I served in the same church for 33 years. And it was really interesting. It's hard to believe, in 2015, that's when the accident happened. And that morning we had a big day for first responders. We were honoring police and EMTs and fire and all those things. And that afternoon, because the other big part of my story, I love the baseball bat, but when I tell my story, then I think of the handlebars, because we rode Harley Davidson. I rode motorcycles since I was like 11 years old. I learned when I was little, and my wife and I both loved it, and that was our hobby. We did it together. We enjoyed it, just kind of getting away from life and just enjoying a ride in the motorcycle. And in June 7th, 2015, we were doing that. One son was married, ready to have a child. Second son was getting married. Our youngest son was going to be a senior in high school. And on June 7th, we were out taking a ride on the Harley. And within a mile of our home coming back, we were hit head on by a drunk driver. And again, just a tragic part of our life. There were so many good things in our life, so many wonderful things in ministry, and the church was growing. We saw great things happening in Reading, Pennsylvania. But that day was another life. That was, we talk about a game changer. That was another game-changing event in our life.
Let's take a quick break from our conversation to tell you a little bit more about Compassion International and their Fill the Stadium initiative. Due to COVID-19, 70,000 children and their families in the Compassion programs needed your urgent support. You see, 70,000 is the capacity of the average pro football stadium, and that's where the idea for Fill the Stadium came about. And it's a stadium that cannot remain empty, and your help is needed here for these children in crisis, just looking for basic necessities like food and education and medical care and vocational training, things like that. Your donation will help these children and their families through the critical next 12 months. And great updates here. Our goal is to help 70,000 kids. Well, so far we've filled almost 50,000 seats of those 70,000 kids. So you are doing an amazing work, and many of our pro athlete friends have donated large amounts of money as well. And it's just really neat to see the body come together in a need of crisis. But the work isn't finished yet. Still got about 20,000 kids and their families that are in desperate need of help. So you can help restore what COVID-19 destroyed and help provide essential food, medical care, and support for a child and their family during this pandemic. Go to fillthestadium.com to donate, to make a difference in a child's life and their family's life at fillthestadium.com. This is a stadium that cannot remain empty. Again, fillthestadium.com. Bryan Koch is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. I want to go into that moment in a second, that June 2015 day. So much that transpired, and obviously there's so many different things and lessons that come out of it that I really want to dive into. But for just a minute before we go there, because it was 33 years of ministry that you talked about, and 33 years as a pastor. In fact, as we tape this, you had just finished your calling as a pastor just a couple of weeks ago. So What was that like becoming a pastor? That's where I want to kind of go real quick, and then we'll tell the story and walk through what happened after 2015. But what was that like going in and becoming a pastor from a guy who was a baseball guy for all these years and trying to find your way? You said you were 26 when you're becoming a pastor, and obviously into your 40s and 50s, you know, you've been doing it for a while and you start to develop rhythms. But early on, I have to imagine there was a lot of growing pains.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And what I've learned, Jason, from it is that I think not growing up in the church, not really knowing, I didn't know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I didn't know anything about God.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, pastoring, that was to my advantage, because now obviously I grew, I was discipled, and I learned the word, but I never forgot. There wasn't a time from the time I was 26 until a couple of weeks ago when I'm no longer in pastoral ministry, I was always thinking about that guy or gal that was walking into our church that didn't know God. I wasn't a second generation Christian. Not that there's a thing in the world wrong with that. My boys were raised in their faith. But I was always thinking about that person that didn't know God. Like they're walking into our church. They got invited. They're there. They don't have a clue of what's really going on, but they're there in our church. And so as I was ministering, sharing the word, the gospel, whatever, I was always thinking about that person. And I think it was really helpful for me. And yeah, there were a lot of things I had to learn because I didn't, you know, you're a baseball player, you know who wins the game, who's got the most runs in the bottom of the ninth. And in church, sometimes it's different because it's all about life change. It's about people knowing God in a personal way. It's not just attendance and offerings, you know, it's just not nickels and noses. It's really the people's hearts who are genuinely changed by God. So that was always my focus. 100 members voted me in. I was 26 years old. 99 said yes. 1 said no, which that was a good thing in many ways. Yeah. But 100 members voted me in. We were there for years, like 33 years. The church had enormous growth. We had several building programs. We, on a Christmas Eve or Easter, would have, you know, between 7,000 and 9,000 people attending. And it was just, those were some wonderful days where we did our best to, like, you know, the biggest challenge at times was pastoring a growing church, trying to, you know, be at 3 different baseball games for your boys and mow the grass and balance the checkbook and just the balance of life. But I had a wonderful wife who was just, we served together and she loved it. And those were some good years for us, but a lot of growing years for sure.
So take us through June 2015. I think you said June 7th is the day.
7th, yeah.
And, you know, it's funny. I remember June 6th, 2015 personally, because that's my daughter's birthday. And so that would have been her 11th birthday on June 6th. And so I remember almost every birthday as unfortunately they're getting more and more now, Brian. We're at 17 almost here. Right. But I think about her birthday and I think about that time, you know, it's the summertime, early summer in Pennsylvania, you know, in the Northeast, you're out, you know, doing things outdoors. You're just happy that it's warmer. And for you, motorcycles was a thing. Take us through what exactly happened and, you know, the loss of your wife. And then we'll kind of talk what transpires after that.
Yeah, well, it was Saturday afternoon, and that's we'd kind of get in our game time mindset where we didn't do a whole lot on Saturday nights. We'd, you know, do it during the day, go to games, and then get home, start working on the message. The next day, we were honoring our first responders. We did that in our church a lot. And that's what we did. I preached a message that morning called True Blue, like being a real friend to those in our community. We had 911 operators that were taking calls, and we probably had, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 50 police officers, EMTs, fire. We had fire trucks in the parking lot. It was an annual thing that we did in May, or in this year it happened to be June, but great day. And so just another great weekend. We saw lives changed and we went home, we were rejoicing. And, you know, my wife said, hey, you know, it's a beautiful day. And it was a beautiful day. So why don't we hop on the bike and go? And the boys had different things going on with their friends. So we did. We took a ride. In fact, at that time, my oldest son was on his way to vacation. He was married. They were going to Myrtle Beach. Middle son was doing something locally, you know, driving, doing something. And our youngest was somewhere with a friend. So we took a motorcycle ride. Often my wife loved ice cream, so the ride would end up somewhere at an ice cream shop up in Lancaster County, up in the Amish country. Sure. And just, we had a great time. We were talking about, man, think of the life change, you know, we're soon to be empty nesters. And we were just talking about that. We hopped back on the motorcycle. We're heading home. It was about 6:00. Beautiful, beautiful evening. We're within a mile of our home, and it was just a really tough turn. And we took that turn at least 10,000 times. We rode the motorcycle a lot. And I said, boy, that turn there, if you're messing with your radio or on your cell phone, you're not paying attention. So I'd always put the motorcycle down tight on the white line. And that's the last memory I have of it, because we were hit head on by a young man who'd been hooked on prescription drugs and alcohol for almost a decade. Really tough life. And I often thought I would have loved to meet him at our church rather than meeting him on that turn. And he hit us head on. Well, actually, he hit just about head on. It hit me right on my left leg. I had a big Ultra, so it had the pack on the back. So Lynn, when it hit us that hard, her neck snapped, and instantly the police told me, they said, Bryan, you know one thing, your wife did not suffer. She instantly was taken.
Yeah.
So they brought the helicopters in, they closed the road. I mean, it's so close to our home that my youngest was coming home and he couldn't go that way. He saw the road closed, he saw the thing, but he had no idea it was his mom and dad that almost were done.
Yeah.
There's a ton to this story where the first guy that came up to meet us, first that ran into the accident, he was a Christian. He thought I was dead because I'm pinned under the car, the SUV. He went to Lynn, and lo and behold, I went into total shock. They eventually helicoptered me to Reading Hospital, the same hospital I was born in, and now going to save my life. It was a tragic night. I mean, they told my boys, my son drove back then from Myrtle Beach that night, didn't get into like 4 a.m. And they said they didn't know, they really didn't think that I was going to make it. And they said, your dad's alive, but we're not sure he's going to make it through the night. So for my boys, that was like, they became men overnight. It was just so hard for them.
So you and your wife, 28 years married, right?
Yeah.
And so on the motorcycle, she's kind of behind you. It's one motorcycle, right?
Yeah,
it's not like you're both riding separate motorcycles here.
Yeah.
And then you get hit. And then what's the next thing that you remember waking up or whatever that was? Because you went through a ton of surgeries and transfusions and loss of your life.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot that happened, right?
Yeah. I 6 units of blood. Ended up having 19 surgeries on my leg. They kept infection. So I'm an AK amputee above the knee. They kept taking more off because of infection. So it's about mid-thigh that my leg was removed. And totally I did hundreds of funerals as a pastor, never thinking I would miss my own wife's funeral. I was in this medicated coma and they buried her probably 3 weeks before I woke up. And the chaplain told my family and friends, they said, look, if you don't want to be the one to tell Bryan what happened, then just change the subject and he'll go with you. And so people would do that. I'd say, where am I? What's going on? I'd start waking up. What's going on? Where are we? Where's my phone? And finally, Lynn's sister, Rhonda, said to me, I'll never forget it. I said, Rhonda, what in the world's going on? I said, where am I? She said, Bryan, you and Lynn were in a really bad accident. And Lynn is dead. She's in heaven. And you have lost your left leg. And to that point, I didn't even know that. And I'll never forget running my hand down over my leg and not feeling my kneecap. And that was the first time I realized that, wow, my life's going to be totally different. And that was 51 days after the accident. And so, that was a terrible day.
After that,
I think the biggest struggle was for me, I knew as a Christian, bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong. And I think for those listening today, Jason, what I want to say is that it's not wrong to question God. You can't live there. You can't stay there. But God, I said, how could this be? I mean, we've served you all these years. And if I'd just hit one more red light, if we'd have left 5 minutes later, I'd have passed this drunk driver on a straight stretch and maybe we'd have went right by him. But, the Bible says our days are numbered and God has a plan. And it's, we live in a fallen world. And it happened that we met that young man on the worst turn of that road and he hit us head on.
Did you ever meet the young man?
The first time I met him was in a courtroom. Because media caught it. It was a ton of media in the Reading area because I'm a pastor. When he was a drunk driver, I mean, the local news carried story after story. And so I saw pictures of him when I woke up because at first I didn't know that he was a drunk driver, but he was at least, I think, 6 times the limit. He was well over the limit. And so the first time I met him was in a courtroom. It's DUI Thursday. So now I'm in rehab. I'm out of the hospital. I'm trying to learn to use my leg. It's about 2 weeks before Christmas. And it's the first time I meet this young man face to face. And what happens in it, you get to give, the police came to be in supportive of me. They were, because what he did was he fell on the mercy of the court. He said, yes, I was guilty. And then we got to say, my sister-in-law, my oldest son, and myself got to talk directly to him. And that was a big learning thing for me too, Jason, because, it's one thing to hear about forgiveness. It's an amazing thing to understand forgiveness. It's life-changing to receive God's forgiveness, but sometimes it's hard to give forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, how am I going to forgive this young guy? I mean, he took my wife. My boys will never have their mom again. They'll never, I have 2 grandsons now. They only know their grandmother by pictures. Yeah. And I'll never forget having long talks with my boys. And as hard as it was, I told the young man, I maybe talked for a few minutes. And I asked the judge, I said, rather than talking to you, Judge, may I turn and look to this young man? And he said, yeah. And I looked directly at him and I said, because I was being asked by media, how many years do you think you should get? And I said, well, honestly, it doesn't matter if he gets 20 minutes or 20 years. I have a life sentence. I'm going to live the rest of my life this way. And so I told him that. And I did tell him, I said, Sean, I said, as hard as it is, we do forgive you. We forgive you for what you did. I said, I remember a day in my life when I could have easily done to someone what you've done to us. So we truly forgive you. And the best advice I could give you is to let God do a work in your life and let him forgive you. And so right there in the courtroom, as hard as it was, I presented to him a simple truth that Jesus would forgive him if he ever opened his heart. And he cried and said he could never forgive himself. He ended up getting 4.5 years. In fact, he fought it. And so presently he's out. He has to wear an ankle bracelet and all that, but he's not finished his sentence and really was going to go for a retrial because he felt he was poorly represented. But so it became a complex thing. But my boys did the same thing. As hard as it was, we truly forgave him.
I wrote a book on forgiveness, and I had a very difficult time forgiving my father, and there was no death involved. It was just kind of pain that he had caused for years from alcoholism and other things.
Right.
This is a different animal with forgiveness. How long did it take for you to forgive him? Because the Bible's clear. Jesus is clear. We're to forgive every single time we've been wronged, right? 70 times 7, Matthew 18, the parable of the unforgiving debtor. If you got your Bible, when you're done with this listening to this interview, go read that, and you'll see how clear the Bible is. Paul talks about it a lot in Ephesians and Colossians. So there's no disparity on what we're supposed to do as Christians, but that doesn't mean it's easy. What was that for you, the process to get to where you could say that to him? But then it begins another process to actually have to live that out each day.
Yeah, that's a great way to, the struggle for me was, like you said, the Bible's black and white. It's plain. Like, we expect to be forgiven because we're all sinners. Then we need to forgive. I'll never forget. My dad's got 7 brothers. One of my uncles, was saying, he flat out, he didn't know Christ. He said, Bryan, how in the world can you forgive this SOB?
Yeah.
He took off your leg. He killed your wife. He said, how in the world can you forgive him? And I said, because I remember that God forgave this SOB, meaning myself. I was lost and didn't know God. And if God would have not forgiven me, and there was a lot he had to forgive in my life. So that was the first thing, realizing that I'm a sinner. And without God's grace, I have no hope of heaven either. And I did think about, what if I'd have met this young boy? Because now you mentioned ministry. I'm transitioning to Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. Addiction is a big problem in our culture today.
Yes.
And so I'd have done everything in my power to help this young man if I met him at church or met him on the street. But unfortunately, I met him with my motorcycle and his SUV. And so it was hard. And I did question, like, God, why the timing? Why have you allowed this to happen? But yet I knew I needed to forgive him, because if we don't forgive him, it's not going to change. It's not going to put my leg back. It's not if he gets 40 years in prison, I'm going to feel better. Every day I wake up, I strap this leg on. I'm going to always remember. I think one of the mistakes we do make in ministry, Jason, is that we tell people, well, you need to forgive and forget. That's not right.
No.
We're never going to forget.
Correct.
Every day I strap this leg on. Every time I look at a picture of my wife, I'm realizing my life has changed. but I can forgive. And I'm not going to let that unforgiveness become a cancer that ruins my life, that keeps me miserable. And I often talk about, I'm at the crossroads of bitter and better. I want to go down better. I want to go down better avenue. I don't want to live bitter. And my boys have said, Dad, you seem like your old self. You got your laugh back. You got your sarcasm back. It's that locker room mentality. We goof with each other. And that's only because I've truly forgiven this young man, because God's forgiven me. It's that simple. And it is a powerful truth. It's not easy. It's a struggle. And there's days you're thinking, man, where my life would be had that not happened. But there's been so much good. The Bible says in Romans 8, God can take all that happens and he can turn it for good. And I've seen that certainly in my life in so many ways. He's added to my story. There's more chapters being written. I could have been bitter because I decided not to give the beanball sign. And now I got hit and lose my career. I'm trying to live a good life. And now I get hit by a drunk driver. But you know what? God has a way. Only God can take all of that tragedy and turn it into triumph for his glory.
So as you move forward, as you begin to heal, as you begin to, I don't know if you have a prosthetic leg or figure out how to walk again. Right. So you have a prosthetic leg and you're sort of learning just how to be a human again in some ways when you get your leg taken away. But then you're also a pastor and you have I guess an awareness that God is still calling you to continue to pastor, because you said it was just a couple of weeks ago. So what was that like, trying to learn the process of the rehab from a physical standpoint, but then the rehab to get ready to say, I'm going to go back into this church, stand up there and preach God's word after all of this took place? What was that journey like in that process?
Well, the story again, the baseball bat, the handlebars, then it became a cane. And, it's really interesting because the next verse, let me give you this verse. It says, the Lord directs the steps, Psalm 37:23. The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall. So I had many amputees tell me, Bryan, I don't know how you're doing this. Like, I know what it's like to lose a leg or an arm, but I don't know what it's like to lose my wife and my leg.
Right.
And so I was grieving the loss of my wife. My youngest son was a senior in high school, so I'm trying to be a good dad. I'm using a walker till I get my prosthetic leg. And then it's just, when you've walked on a leg for 55 years on two of them, and now you got one, it's that faith of, man, I don't even know if I can do this. And so it was a difficult journey. But eventually you just start, again, you don't really have a choice. You can be bitter or better. I just thought, well, God's going to give me the strength to do this. And so we did. I pastored for, 5, almost 6 more years. And again, what a story, because our story really can. So many people said, Bryan, I was inspired by your story. I came to faith when I heard your story. And I thought, you know what? That's really what it's all about. And so we were grateful for that. But God designs our life. And I was grateful for the leg. It helps me get around. I'm not bound in a wheelchair because my hips were crushed. My pelvis was crushed. I have as much metal in my body as I have outside my body. And so it was a challenging time, but yet God was really faithful. And we kept proclaiming the gospel. The doors really opened up for me then to speak outside the church. And that's really what's led to this transition, because I've had opportunities at businesses and universities. And back in the day, I was a chaplain. I loved hockey. I was a big time Flyers fan here near Philly. I ended up being the chaplain for the Reading Royals ECHL hockey team for like 5 years, and have always had a heart for athletes and those. So I've had a lot of open doors to speak, and but it's been quite a journey. It's really it was a part of my story I never thought I would have. I thought my story was, hey, minor league baseball player, get hit in the eye, become a pastor.
Right.
Never did I think I would become an amputee. I'll never forget, in rehab, one of the nurses came in. She said, Bryan, there's a patient here that wants to talk to you. And I said, oh, okay, I'll try to do that. It was Rocky Colavito.
Yeah. Who got hit in the eye, right?
Well, I don't know if he may have gotten hit in the eye. He was a good, big time Cleveland Indian, great player, local Reading guy. He lost his leg through diabetes.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And I thought, Rocky Colavito wants to meet me. Well, good grief. I want to meet Rocky Colavito. Sure. And we sat there and had a great conversation. And I thought, like you said earlier, it's just the way God directs our path.
Yeah.
And when you're going through it, you don't understand it. But when you get back and you look back at it, you're like, okay, God, I didn't understand it then, but like, I'm starting to understand it a little bit better now. You have some aha moments in life for sure.
Oh my gosh. You have the most aha moments that I can think of for a person to go through. Do you remember the first day you stood back up at your church and preached after this?
I'll never forget it. We had 3 services that day because it was packed. There were thousands of people that came. And I do remember in my wheelchair finally, just getting up because at that time when I first preached in October, I didn't have my leg. So I stood there on one leg and I preached the message. In fact, we were doing a series. We were preaching the Bible about epic stories of the Bible. And we would pray and plan months ahead of time. And my message that day, because we had a teaching team, was crossing the Red Sea. And, the Bible says that there was a pathway under that Red Sea that no one knew about except God, but God parted the Red Sea. And so that was not only an epic day preaching the Bible, but it was an epic day in my life, the life of the church. Many people that day gave their hearts to Christ, and I will never forget that day. Mm-hmm. And then Christmas Eve, we had a lot of Christmas Eve services. That was the first time I preached with my leg on. And I literally did. I actually, I think it'd be easier this way. I rolled my leg up and you could see my amputee, and then talked about the stump of Jesse. And again, I think one of the ways, Jason, I've gotten through, I pray a lot, but we have to laugh. We have to say, you know what, God, when you look back and see some of the things, only God could be faithful to help us the way he has. And my boys are blessed. My family has been blessed, and we're just really thankful for his help.
I'm sure people are listening are shaking their head just like I am. Like, how can you move forward having such tragedy have taken place in your life, Bryan? And obviously that's where the peace that surpasses all understanding, his ways, not our ways, everything that you would say as a Christian, you want to have faith in the worst moments, in those fiery furnaces, those valleys of the shadows of death. Like, you want to have those moments and say, I'm going to be strong. But you can't really know until it happens to you. And you've still been able to push forward. Your book, as you've shown and mentioned a couple times, is I'm All Right, a journey of tragedy to triumph. So leave us with this. First of all, where you are today, and you've kind of shown and shared how you're doing today. But what's God showing you and teaching you now? Because I'm sure in the last 6 years, he's shown and taught you a lot. But what's he teaching you today, especially after what we just went through with this crazy 2020 year and going into 2021? What's he teaching you now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Another great question. For me, I have some bad days. I think that's the other thing. It's not like, oh man, Bryan. No, I have some bad days. I never have a bad hair day. Some people have a bad hair day, Jason. I never have a bad hair day.
No, you don't.
But there's days that I have a bad leg day. All right. Like I've been wearing my leg for 10, 11 hours. And I'm just like, it's like when a lady has a nice pair of shoes, but she's like, oh, I can't wait to get these shoes off. There's days I can't wait to get this leg off.
Yeah.
And so I have those moments. And I think the thing I've learned the most as a pastor, I thought I understood, did hundreds of funerals. I thought I understood grief. I don't know that I really did. I didn't have a lot of death in my family personally. So what I've learned, Jason, is that I listen to people differently now than I used to. I'm a better listener than I used to be. And I think people hear me differently now than they used to. Oh, former minor league baseball player, pastors a mega church, doesn't really how would he know where I'm at? But I listen to people a lot. There's many people I talk to now that aren't even a part of our church. They've been hit by a drunk driver. They've lost a loved one. When I speak in different churches and places, I just hear so many stories. And so I've learned to listen better. And I think I've learned that it's really not about us, our ability, our talent, or whatever. It's really about God. If God doesn't touch the heart or stir someone, there's really not going to be life change. And so those are some of the things that I'm really learning. And I'm just, to just enjoy every moment because, life is short. Things can change quickly in life. And I've learned that like one pitch, one motorcycle ride, everything can change. And so we're not, boasting about tomorrow because we don't know what tomorrow will bring, but you just got to enjoy each day. And I think I've learned a lot about grief too, because I didn't want to go to my, people say, well, the first Thanksgiving, the first Christmas. What I've learned, there's a lot of firsts in life. What about when your grandson turns 1 year old? What about when he takes his first steps? Or, there's a lot of firsts in life. And so God's grace needs to help us every day, because we never forget what we've gone through, but God gives us the strength to go through it with his grace.
It's bryankoch.net, BRYANKOCH.net, right? People can go there if they're interested in maybe bringing you in to speak or want to have you to share your story.
Sure.
bryankoch.net. And your book, again, I'm All Right, A Journey of Tragedy to Triumph. I don't know how to really end this and wind this down, Bryan, but your story's a real powerful one. It's encouraging to me. I hope this isn't the last time you and I talk. I don't think it will be. I think God brings people together for purposes and for a reason. And hopefully as people listen to this interview, they know, really a conversation, they know that there is a greater hope that can be found even in the worst tragedy, the worst triumphs that a person can go through. And that is what Christ is about and who he is, and putting our faith in him. So thanks for joining us, my friend. Really great to connect with you.
Well, thank you for your ministry. You do a great job, Jason. I love the way you share all these stories. And so it was an honor to be with you today.
Man, that was one powerful story from Bryan Koch. Holy cow. And I just want to mention, forgive me, because as we taped the interview, I was calling him Bryan Koch, Koch. That's how his last name is spelled. I should have asked him how he pronounced it, because I just presumed it was Koch. It's actually Koch. Kuck is kind of how it sounds, and Koch is how it's spelled. So I told Bryan after we were done to forgive me, and he did, thankfully. Obviously, forgiveness was a topic we talked about. But I just wanted to make sure you all knew how to actually pronounce his last name, Bryan Koch, spelled Koch. And doesn't he have one of the more powerful stories you've ever heard? Seriously. I mean, to not only have his baseball career ended because of a pitch that nails him in the eye, to then have his life upended, lose his wife of 28 years in a motorcycle accident that he almost loses his life to, but he finds a way to survive, and not just to survive, but really to thrive and press on and press forward, even without a left leg that he had for 50 years, and now it's not there. And the evidence of that is clear with the prosthetic and the fact that he doesn't have a left leg anymore. And now look what he's doing. Like, look at the impact he's making, telling people about Jesus. That is finding purpose in the pain. That is seeing and living out your faith in a very real and tangible way. That's powerful. Man, that is just powerful. And I'm super impressed with Bryan Koch, and I'm just thankful for him. Thankful that he joined us here today on the show. And again, his website is bryankoch.net, BRYANKOCH.net. And he's speaking, he's traveling, he's working with Teen Challenge, which is a tremendous ministry, and just opportunities for him to share his faith. If you want to have him in and have him, share his story with your congregation or audience, man, he's the guy who's going to really share a powerful story. And how cool is God that he can still use a guy like Bryan, even in the midst of that accident. So just appreciate him. Really, really thankful that he shared his story here today on the show. We're thankful to you as well for listening. Make sure you check out our website, sportsspectrum.com. As Bryan mentioned, we have a ministry here that shares stories of sports and faith. That's what we're about. Our goal is to bring glory to the name of Jesus through sports, and we do that with our website, sportsspectrum.com. We do that with this podcast and our podcast network of shows, and we do it with our magazine, the Sports Spectrum magazine. You can subscribe right now for $18, super cheap, for a whole year, or 2 years for $30. So you get even better of a deal if you subscribe for 2 years, $30. And you get 4 issues per year of Sports Spectrum's magazine. It's a quarterly magazine. We have a couple bonus issues as well that we throw in there. So you're going to come away with 5 or 6 issues in a year. And our magazine, to me, is the best thing we do. And it's the most powerful way to tell stories in many ways, which is to put them down in written form, and they last forever. And the magazine is a great way to subscribe. It makes a great gift for someone. Maybe you have a kid or a grandkid that you want to read stories on sports and faith. They love sports. Maybe you want to introduce them to the gospel through sports. Well, Sports Spectrum is a great gift for that. So you can subscribe today at sportsspectrum.com, and would love to have you be a part of the Sports Spectrum magazine family. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to our sponsors, Compassion International. FillTheStadium.com is their website. You can go check that out and donate. FillTheStadium.com to help those kids who are stuck in just awful, awful scenarios and situations and just conditions that are unimaginable. You can help release kids from poverty by going to fillthestadium.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day.